Winning Blueprint presents.
In the Lab Room. Green Bay Packers.
Tell me this. How is it that you win 11 games, make it to the postseason, win your division, win a postseason game, which is something you didn't do last year, yet your season is unfulfilled and worse than a season ago when you didn't win a postseason game? How is that? That's so when you are the Green Bay Packers and you had a season for the ages in 2011, even though you didn't win a postseason game and you did not win the Super Bowl. Yet, in 2012, you had an excellent season. But by your standards, it was a season that paled in comparison to 2010 or 2011. And on that note, welcome. This is the Lab follow-up for the Green Bay Packers. I'm your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me. A lot to get to with these Green Bay Packers. They had one rocky season, and that's to say it in a kind way. That's putting it very lightly, and I'm treading softly. This Packers team, for all of the accomplishments of this football team, because they started this season off slow and were able to roar back, finish up strong, and come back and win that division. For all of the accomplishments, this team took a lot of flack during the regular season. And we'll talk about the perception in the media of this team and the perception in that locker room. And we'll just talk about the Green Bay Packers in general. Let's start by talking about this team in the 2012 season, how they arrived at their fate at the end of that season, and what they need to do moving forward to make this team once again a Super Bowl contending football team. So looking at this season, the Packers, it was a bumpy start to this season. And again, that's stating it very optimistically. This team started out, and there was so much expectations, especially how good the Packers were a season ago. And I think that's where the mistake was made right off the bat. Everyone assumed that the Packers were going to have it on cruise control like they did in the 2011 season. Look, that season was one for the ages, one that I've never seen before. I mean, this offense was like a well-oiled machine during the regular season, and it was a juggernaut. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, whatever he did, whatever he touched, it turned to gold. He could close his eyes and throw it up in Jordy Nelson or James Jones or Greg Jennings or Randall Cobb. Someone would come down with the football in 2011. Well, he had a season MVP, as we all know, that is unmatched in the National Football League. You'd be hard-pressed to see anyone put up the type of numbers he put up in 2011. They were cartoonish. And so the expectations for this team, even though they lost in their first playoff game a season ago, I think they just were out of sync against the Giants. They did not play their starters in Week 17 last year against Detroit. So essentially they had 3 weeks off before they played a football game that was meaningful, and they paid for it. They were out of sync. It showed. They weren't prepared, and the Giants took care of them in the divisional round of the postseason last year. So you fast forward to 2012, and you're thinking the Packers are going to pick up where they left off last regular season, and they're just going to start steamrolling teams. And the first game out of the gate lets you know this isn't 2011 anymore. They played the San Francisco 49ers, and the 49ers came in, and they were just more physical than the Green Bay Packers. They smacked them in the mouth. Frank Gore ran for over 100 yards and made it look easy against this Green Bay Packers defense. Alex Smith outplayed Aaron Rodgers, if you can believe that, in this football game. He was absolutely flawless as he passed all over this Green Bay Packers defense, did what he wanted to do. Guys were running free, and they beat the Packers in Lambeau, something that teams found it hard to do in the past, especially last year in 2011. And so that let you know this Packers team was going to have to really rev it up. No one was going to lay down for them, and it wasn't going to be as easy as it was in 2011. So the Packers start the season off 2-3. The last of those losses coming in controversial fashion against the Seattle Seahawks on a Monday night, in which the replacement refs botched a end of game situation and call where they gave the Seahawks a touchdown on a Hail Mary attempt that was clearly an interception, costing the Packers a game. And look, that needed to happen. I'm sorry that it was the Green Bay Packers and they got a loss and this happened at their expense, but this needed to happen to expedite the replacement officials being booted out of the league. The NFL needed to be pushed to get the real referees and real officials back into the game, and something catastrophic had to happen, and it had to happen at the expense of the Green Bay Packers, unfortunately. But that game set the stage for the replacement officials to be booted out of the league, the real officials to be welcomed back into the league with a new deal, and we could move on with our lives in the National Football League. And so the Packers had a legit gripe. That was a game that was absolutely stolen from them. Literally stolen from them. It was their game. They earned it. It was a hard-fought game. They struggled. They gave up an inordinate amount of sacks in this game, yet they persevered, stayed the course, and was able to get the lead and win that football game, except the replacement officials weren't going to allow that to occur. So, yeah, they had a legit gripe in a game that they should have won, that was taken from them. But you can't cry over spilt milk. You have to move on. And so the Packers went after that 2-3 start, and it looked kind of bleak. For a minute there, the sky was falling in Green Bay. Everyone thought that, hey, what's going on with the Packers? Are they going to be able to rev it up? Because the Bears started this season so hot that you felt like if the Packers didn't get their act together quickly, the Bears were going to run away with that division. And Minnesota had started well, and so all of a sudden Green Bay was in third place looking up at the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Bears. But then the Packers, in true Green Bay Packers fashion, won their last 9 out of 11 games, got to 11-5, and basically righted the ship. They leapfrogged not only the Minnesota Vikings, but the Chicago Bears as well, won the division in the NFC North, and they were in the postseason. Once again, all was well in Green Bay. Now, during the course of the season, though, there were always little things that kind of tried to derail the Green Bay Packers, if you will. There was the Jeremiah Finley situation where his agent was criticizing Aaron Rodgers. And I don't know if Jeremiah Finley and Aaron Rodgers have the best relationship. I think that relationship may be a little strained. But nonetheless, you don't criticize other members of your team in the media. And the Packers seem to be doing a lot of that. Aaron Rodgers came out and blasted some of his teammates in the media. It just seemed like a locker room that was disoriented, in disarray. And too many finger-pointing episodes were going on in a locker room. Then there was the 60 Minutes special on Aaron Rodgers, which he felt slighted. He felt like he was disrespected in that segment. Then there was Aaron Rodgers seemed to be always talking in the media about how he feels like he's being disrespected, his team is being disrespected. I learned one thing about Aaron Rodgers in this season in 2012. He's very thin-skinned. He does not have thick skin. He hears everything and he takes everything to heart. And I think that's part of his chip being on his shoulder from being drafted 22nd, 23rd, 24th in the draft, going after Alex Smith and falling and sliding in the NFL draft and having teams pass on him. I think that's all part of his whole persona. That's all part of his mental makeup, that everyone's out to get him. And it seems like he has that, he portrays that a lot. And so sometimes even guys in his own locker room who are on his side, he feels like they have some kind of hidden agenda and he speaks out about it. And sometimes he goes about it the wrong way, and it led people to criticize Aaron Rodgers during the season and say that he wasn't a good leader. Is Aaron Rodgers a great leader? I don't know. People are questioning whether he's a leader or not. Look, I don't know about all that stuff. I don't know about how his teammates perceive him or feel about him in the locker room. I don't know about any of that. All I know is that Aaron Rodgers is one hell of a quarterback. And all that other stuff that people are talking about off to the side, they can have that. They can talk about it. They can do what they want. The man produces on the football field. And until he can't do that anymore, I don't want to hear about anything else about Aaron Rodgers. And that's that. So there was a lot of things going on in this Green Bay Packers locker room. Guys were getting injured. And so this Packers team was able to persevere. But again, it's one thing to beat up on Jacksonville. It's one thing to beat up on Tennessee. It's one thing to beat up on Detroit. It's a totally different animal once you get to the postseason. And the Packers found that out the hard way. The Packers made it to the postseason. They beat Minnesota without Christian Ponder, a team that they had played 3 times in the season, twice in the regular season, once in the postseason. They were able to easily dispose of those Christian Ponderless Vikings and move on to the next round, the divisional round of the postseason, where they were easily disposed of by the San Francisco 49ers. And I thought that game really told the story of this Green Bay Packers team. It really did, because this team was so different. And even though Aaron Rodgers had a heck of a season, and again, everything the Packers did in 2012 was measured up against 2011, and you can't do that. You can't take these seasons and measure them up against each other. They're separate entities, and you have to separate them and leave them as such. And I think that's why Aaron Rodgers took offense to so many things, because I think people were judging this Green Bay Packers team off of the 2011 success, and you can't do that. You look at the stats, and the Packers were 13th in offense in 2012. In 2011, they were 3rd. You look at points scored, they scored up over 35 points a game in 2011. In 2012, 27 points. That's nothing to scoff at, but that's a huge drop-off. We're talking about a touchdown, a full touchdown, less in points scored per game. You look at the defense, this team was plus 24 in the turnover differential in 2011. In 2012, they were plus 7. Again, not a bad number. But again, when you look at it in the context of last year, they're nowhere close. And so that's why I said you have to look at these seasons in separate entities. You can't compare the two. They're not the same team. This is a different roster. You're playing against different teams. And the Green Bay Packers weren't as banged up in 2011 as they were in 2012. And so the Packers in the playoff game against San Francisco were exposed. Defensively, they were not a good football team. Their offensive line stinks. Their running game, non-existent. And so all of these things came to the forefront, and the 49ers basically took advantage of the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers did what he had done all season long, and that's execute offensively and put this team in a position to win. But the defense did not help. Colin Kaepernick had one whale of a ball game. And when I say that, we're talking well over 200 yards passing, another 181 yards on the ground. I mean, he did whatever he wanted to do. One man show is what Colin Kaepernick put on. Over 400 total yards of offense for Colin Kaepernick by himself. And this Packers defense had no answer. They could not run the football effectively, which they didn't do in the regular season either. And so when you have the 20th rushing attack in the league, that's what happens. You're exposed. And those offensive line woes, coupled with the lack of running game, coupled with the defense that couldn't stop the San Francisco 49ers, shot the Green Bay Packers in the foot, in the head, in the legs, in the arm, and their season was finished. So you look at this 2012 season for the Packers, and there are a lot of questions. A lot of questions, and not enough of these questions were answered throughout the regular season and into the postseason. That's why the Packers went home. So now you look at those same questions. They linger into the offseason. Now it's 2013, and they need to address some of these questions to help this team take that next step, move forward, and get back to being a Super Bowl contending team. One of the first questions you ask is, how did Thompson, Wolf, and that group, who's been praised and lauded for all of their moves, this Packers team, they get it as a franchise, and they don't allow this team to really lag behind in personnel. For the most part, the Packers are usually ahead of the curve in personnel. But somewhere along the way, they got lost along that offensive line. This line was an abject disaster in 2012. Now, guys got hurt. Josh Sitton got hurt. Evan Dietrich Smith got hurt. But there was no depth along this offensive line. This was a musical chairs offensive line, and there were Swiss cheese holes all along this offensive line. Aaron Rodgers at times was running for his life. And at some point, it's going to catch up with you. If you remember that Seahawks game that we talked about earlier, he was sacked 11 times in the first half with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, an insane amount of sacks for a half of football. I mean, he was destroyed, and that offensive line was utterly destroyed in that first half, in that game for that matter. And so you can't have that kind of breakdown on your offensive line if you're any team in the National Football League, especially a team like the Green Bay Packers, which so much of their offense runs through their quarterback and is predicated on the success of their quarterback. Without a run game, your quarterback has to be upright, and at times they could not keep Aaron Rodgers upright in this season. So you look at the offseason, and one of the biggest question marks is this offensive line. You got to fix it. And this thing needs to be fixed and addressed immediately. And some of the production of this line may be skewed by some of the injuries, but you need depth. You can't have guys go down and the next man up isn't capable of stepping in and getting the job done. I mean, you went out and got Jeff Saturday over the offseason. He comes in and you bench him at one point, and he still makes it. And he still makes it to the Pro Bowl, which lets you know the Pro Bowl is a joke. In some instances, the Pro Bowl is a joke, but you had to bench him because of the lack of production from Jeff Saturday. And look, this Packers team just struggled offensively on the offensive line, which hurt your running game. The Packers need to invest in a real running back. They keep putting Band-Aids on this running game. They keep trying to be cheap and going the inexpensive route. Look, when you have Aaron Rodgers in that passing game going along as it does, you tend to feel like the running game is just there to supplement the passing game. Look, we don't want you trying to take over. Don't get in the way. When we need you, we'll just call out. And, man, I tell you what, the Packers' offensive line and their running game is like that old 1987 Chevrolet that you got in your driveway. It works. And, you know, you might have to kick it, or you might... Come on. And it starts up. You might have to sit there and play with it for a while, but it'll start up and it'll get going. That's this offensive line and this running game for the Packers. It's not the greatest, but when it gets going, it's solid enough to get you from point A to point B, just like that 87 Chevrolet that's in the driveway. It's not the prettiest. It's definitely not the most efficient way to travel, but it gets you from point A to point B. But the Packers are too good of a franchise to be operating on a level like that. They need to have this running game and offensive line up to speed with the rest of this offense. They got to stop trying to get guys like Cedric Benson and Ryan Grant to come in and fix this running game. They need a real true threat out of the backfield. You know, Alex Green, that's cute, but Alex Green is not a number one running back in the National Football League. That was evident by his 3.4 or 3.6 or 3.8 yards per carry. The Packers need to be more explosive. James Starks, he's always injured. You can't rely on James Starks. So forget about that. You need a true threat in your backfield. You need to address that. You need to address the offensive line. You look at the skill positions. Greg Jennings, he's gone. He's not coming back. That's a foregone conclusion. Anyone in Green Bay, anyone that's a fan of the team, anyone that's been following that situation closely knows that that's a done deal. Greg Jennings is gone. The minute Randall Cobb emerged as a true number one threat at the wide receiver position, and Greg Jennings couldn't get back from injury, and Randall Cobb continued to pick up the slack and then some, you knew all of a sudden Greg Jennings became an expendable commodity to this Green Bay Packers team. And so they're not going to pony up and ante up the type of money that he probably thinks he deserves and that he will generate on the open market. And so the Packers are going to let him walk. He already put his Green Bay home on the market, so he's gone. And there's a distinct possibility that you could be seeing Greg Jennings twice a year, because I have an eerie feeling that he's going to end up in Minnesota. But that's another discussion for another day. You have to also take into consideration that Jermichael Finley, and look, the fans in Green Bay have really been getting on Jermichael Finley. My gosh. I tell you what, as a fan of the Redskins, you need to tread softly and lightly here if you're a Green Bay Packers fan. Don't be so quick to run a guy that is as talented as Jermichael Finley out of town line. Look, I've watched him just as you have. He is very inconsistent. He drops the football way too much, too many lapses in concentrations. I get it. I understand where you're coming from. But Redskins fans, not including myself, because I was a big proponent of Carlos Rogers. I was one of his biggest fans in Washington, wanted him to stay. But the Redskins fans were so hard on Carlos Rogers. His first opportunity to get out, he got out. And look, he became a Pro Bowl corner in San Francisco. He started catching the football, which is the reason why the Redskins fans and faithful ran him out of town in the first place, because he couldn't catch. And all of a sudden, he could catch. It was new life in San Francisco. And what do you know? They have a gem on their hands. That could happen to you with Jermichael Finley. Don't be so rash to make a hasty decision and running this young man out of town and regretting it later on. Yeah, you have talent at tight end, but you need to have a go-to threat. And look, he's as athletic as it gets from the tight end position in the National Football League. You're not going to find someone as big, athletic, and a mismatch as Jermichael Finley. Now, look, again, he has lapses in concentration. He does not catch the ball as cleanly and as often as you would like, but the man still had over 60 catches, over 600 yards, and he's getting better every single year. Give him a chance to show you that he can be the tight end that you think that he really is. But if you run him out of town, I guarantee you, you will regret it, because Tom Crabtree and all the other guys you have on this roster aren't good enough to be your number one tight end. So be careful what you ask for. You just might get it in Green Bay, because it looks like Jermichael Finley won't be back. There is a possibility that he will be back, but it's looking really slim right now, because I think the Packers are a little disappointed in not only some of his production and play on the field, but all of the theatrics from him and his agent throughout the course of the season is so unnecessary. And so the Packers might take this opportunity to part ways with Jermichael Finley in the offseason. So you look at the needs for the Packers in the upcoming offseason, draft, free agency. Offensive line, it stands out. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You could use guards. You could use a center. And look, you shuffle guys around. Maybe with all the injuries, guys come back. They start fitting into the puzzle. Maybe your line isn't as bad as it seems, but you need depth. Either way, either you need starters or you need depth. Either way, you need offensive line help. So I'm thinking guards, because I'm thinking Marshall Newhouse isn't that bad. He could be better, but he isn't that bad. Brian Balaga on the right side is your best offensive lineman. So I think at the tackle position, you can hold serve there. But the guards, your interior, man, was that a mess in 2012. And Marshall Newhouse had his games where he was just putrid as well. So keep an eye on this offensive line. You need to address your offensive line. Running back. How many years can you continue to keep trying to put veterans in there and just move along as if your running game isn't important? The year you won the Super Bowl, your running game came to life in the postseason, and it was a big part of you winning the Super Bowl. You need a running game. I thought Aaron Rodgers really had his head blown up last season. After that MVP season, he thought that he could do no wrong, and he came out and said, we don't need a running game. Really? That's how you feel? That was one of the dumbest comments I've heard in a long time from an NFL quarterback. Quarterbacks generally don't say dumb things out of their mouth. That was pretty stupid. And it looked like at times the Packers thought that they didn't need a running game. They did, and they didn't have it. When they needed it, it cost them. You need a running back. Stop trying to get 6th and 7th round picks. Stop trying to get guys off the street. Stop getting old veterans. Get a real running back. Somebody that you can give the football to. You haven't had a real back in Green Bay since Ahman Green. I'm bypassing Ryan Grant, because even when he was at his best, he didn't scare anyone. The last scary running back you had in Green Bay was Ahman Green. Get a real running back. So those are definitely issues. If you're going to cut Jermichael Finley loose, you'll probably need another tight end. And again, you have tight ends, but none of those guys are true, legit number ones. They're nice supplemental tight ends, guys that you plug in when you're in a 2 or 3 tight end set and the defense isn't paying attention to them. They sneak open and they make something happen. But when the defense is looking for them, these aren't guys that I think are really going to have an impact on the game. So these are all things that you have to focus in on if you're the Packers. I think you're fine at wide receiver, even with Jennings leaving. The Packers keep a slew of receivers on deck. And so that's not even something you need to explore. You look at the defensive side of the football, I think you need to continue to get better at the linebacker position. I mean, the linebacker position for me isn't one of your strengths. When you have injuries, that's when it's more noticeable than ever. When Clay Matthews went down, you suffered. You draft Nick Perry, he gets injured for the season. So you're back to Eric Walden and other guys, and back to square one basically with guys out there. And when the injuries started to mount, you didn't have an answer at the linebacker position. I think you need more linebacking help. Charles Woodson is getting up there in age. But again, I think the Packers do a good job of really replenishing that secondary. Casey Hayward really stood out in 2012. Sam Shields is a guy that's emerging as a very talented young corner. I think the Packers are fine in the secondary. M.D. Jennings had a solid season at safety. I think you're fine in the secondary. I think where you really need to focus in on the defensive side of the football is your front seven. You need to focus in on that D-line as well. Defensive tackle, I think you're okay with Raji, and then you went and got Daniels a season ago. I think you need to address the defensive ends, however. You could use some more beef and girth there to help bolster this defensive front, though. So that's going to do it for the Green Bay Packers. If I were the Packers with that first pick in the 2013 draft, in the first round, I think you got to select an offensive line. If one is there that can be of use to you and he's high on your draft board, you take him. If you're the Packers, though, you're still in a position where you take the best player available on your board that can help you. So if that's a tight end and you decide to part ways with Jermichael Finley, by all means. If that's a tackle, do it. If that's a guard, center, you do it. You don't draft guards and center in the first round, though. So that's highly unlikely that a player would be that high on your board on your offensive line. That's a position of need. If I'm the Packers, running back, defensive line, defensive end, especially linebacker, these are all positions that I'm targeting early in the draft, trying to get value for. You can get later on in the draft a center or a guard and have that person pan out for you down the road. I don't think you need to invest in early draft selection. And also there's free agency. Don't be afraid to dip your nose in there, figure out if there's some guys that can help you from that aspect as well, and see if you need to pluck from that pool and see if you can get guys to help you that way as well. You may need to get another kicker. It's funny as it seems because Mason Crosby has been so consistent for you over the years. He's been all but automatic over the last 7-8 years. For him to have a absolute total meltdown in 2012, surprising to say the least, but that's something that you'll have to probe into because you can't have your field goal kicker being a hindrance to your football team. Your field goal kickers are supposed to be someone that you trust to put on the field. Now look, in Mason Crosby's defense, he missed the majority of his kicks. About 7 of them came from 50 yards or above. I'm a firm believer that field goal kickers are much like golfers, much like shooters in the NBA. When that ball is not going in the hoop or in the cup, or in this case, in through the uprights, it's a mental game that it starts to play with you. All of a sudden now, your jumper doesn't feel as good because the ball isn't going in the hoop, and you just need to see it go in. All of a sudden now, those putts that you used to make, they're not as easy as they used to be because the hole seems to have shrunk. And now you're finding yourself pressing, trying to make the perfect shot to make that putt from about 16 yards away, or that jumper that was easily good from 16 feet no longer is falling. Same with field goal kickers. That 45-yard field goal that used to be automatic, you could make it in your sleep. All of a sudden now you're pressing because the last 2 kicks you missed because you missed the previous 2 kicks to the left, so you overcompensated and you pushed it to the right. And now it's a mental challenge. You just need to see the ball go through the uprights. And I thought the Packers tried it, Mason Crosby out on the field too many times for long distance field goals. He missed them, and it started to play mind games on him. He'd push it right, so the next kick he'd overcompensate to the left. He'd miss it to the left. And then all of a sudden now it's a mental mind game. Now you're arguing with yourself. What do I do? Do I push it left so that it draws back right? Do I overcompensate, kick it left so that it can come back to the right? Do I kick it straight and then it just tails off to the left? All these things start running through your head. You're thinking too much and you're missing. And that's what happened to Mason Crosby. You need to figure out in the offseason, if you're the Packers, is his head screwed on straight? Is he mentally checked back in to being the solid kicker that he's been for you over the years? Or is the damage irreparable and he's going to be sporadic from here on out? Don't know. We will see. That's one of the questions, one of the many questions that the Green Bay Packers have to address in the offseason. So I thank you for joining me here on the Green Bay Packers Lab Follow-Up. And again, stay tuned. This week, we'll be going through the rest of the teams in the National Football League. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about the 27th team to select in the 2013 draft, the Houston Texans. And so join me tomorrow when we'll be talking about the Texans. This was the Lab Follow-Up of the Green Bay Packers. I thank you for joining me. Have a good one.
Green Bay Packers in the lab.